Let's start this week with a question. If you and some like-minded compatriots were to stand against the federal government, where would you hole up? A bank? A vault? An island? A wildlife sanctuary? Thank you for tuning in. As always, that's Matt behind the camera. Right? That is you, right, Matt?
Oh, this is me.
Good. I'm relieved. I'm Ben. Most importantly, you're you, we hope, and that makes this stuff they don't want you to know. This week, we are looking at something that has been on the minds of national media and people in the West, but not just the West. The world is watching this story, and that is about the protesters, or militia, or patriots, or some would say terrorists, occupying a wildlife refuge facility in rural Oregon. Here's how it went down. On January 2nd, 2016, a fellow named Ammon Bundy led a group of like-minded men into this refuge facility. This is a pretty rural place. It's about 300 to 305 miles outside of Portland, Oregon, and the nearest town is 30 miles away. Since that time, they have occupied this and been in a standoff with federal and county authorities. No one has died yet, and hopefully that remains the case. But it leads us to another question. Who are these people, these citizens for constitutional freedom, and why are they there? To answer this question, we'll need to travel back to 2001 when a father-son duo named Dwight and Stephen Hammond reportedly set some fires on federal land. Well, actually, we'll need to go back to 1996, spoiler alert, but you'll see why in a second. Anyway, back to 2001. This was the first of two reported fires that the Hammonds set. The first fire burned 139 acres, and according to the official story, this fire was set to cover up poaching of deer on federal land. The second fire occurred in 2006, and this happened because the Hammonds were creating a backfire or a defensive fire to protect their winter feed on their ranch from wildfires caused by lightning on federal land that were encroaching into their property. Both of the Hammonds were convicted of setting fire to federal land. The government sought something like $1 million in damages. There were numerous witnesses, and the judge, as we said, did convict these people, and they went to jail to serve their time. Dwight, the father, was sentenced to 3 months in the federal pen. His son Stephen was sentenced to concurrent 1-year sentences. Over and done, right? Not so fast. This is where we go to 1996, where a little something called the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act was passed. This, despite the name, doesn't just include terrorism. It also includes a mandatory minimum 5-year sentence for arson or setting fire to government property, federal land. The judge thought that this was out of proportion to the crimes committed, and that's why he overruled those mandatory minimum sentences and instead gave them 3 months and then concurrent year sentences. And apparently the actual damage to the land from the second forest fire was less than $1,000. So then over and done, right? Not so fast. See, the federal prosecutors, in a very, very rare move here in the US, appealed the sentence, pushing for those mandatory minimum sentences. And that's exactly what happened. And this successful appeal, making the Hammonds serve 5 years each, this became the flashpoint for Bundy as well as the rest of his group, who are now calling themselves the Citizens for Constitutional Freedom. Ammon Bundy, the son and the leader of the group, currently in Oregon as we record this, has stated that there are several goals for the occupation, the protest, and the organization's existence. One, he believes that God told him that he was divinely inspired to fight for the Hammonds. Two, they said they will not leave until land is turned back over to state and local governments as well as ranchers like the Hammonds. And originally they said they were prepared to stay set in that refuge facility for years if need be, and asked other like-minded organizations and individuals across the US to come and join them. Those are the statements of Bundy and his supporters. Of course, Other groups, opponents or critics will ascribe different goals that the Citizens for Constitutional Freedom may not necessarily agree with. And here's another thing. On January 4th, the Hammonds turned themselves in to Terminal Island FCI in California to serve the remaining 4 years of their sentences. They also, via their lawyer, distanced themselves from the Bundy operation and said that they were not part of this. Essentially, they said that this organization is not speaking for them. Is this a violent group? Well, some members of the organization are armed and others are apparently not armed. And again, at this point, there hasn't been any gunfire exchange. Some of you may be old enough to remember the disastrous events of Waco, Texas. The FBI certainly does, and speculators are saying that that is why the federal powers have not swooped in to raise the building to the ground. However, one thing is for sure, this is an unsustainable situation. Or is it? It depends on who you ask. We are going to be answering these questions in depth in this week's audio podcast because it leads to bigger questions. What is a militia? What is the difference between a militia and, say, a military? Why do some people call these protesters terrorists, domestic terrorists, extremists, and others call them patriots? Is it a difference of interpretation? Is there a legal difference? Is this an anomaly or the beginning of something bigger? Thank you so much for watching. We do hope you'll check out our audio podcast, and we want to know your opinion of the events in Oregon in the thread below. So let us know what you think, and check out our Facebook and our Twitter as we're putting out more news and updates regarding the situation there in Oregon. And if you have a suggestion for something we should cover in a future episode, remember, our best topics always come from you, and we'd love to hear your opinion. Write to us directly at conspiracy@howstuffworks.com.